First thing I want to state is that this video is for educational purposes only. It is for people that vape that are the legal age to do so. I'm not advocating the use of electronic cigarettes, and if you do so with moderation and caution. It is not the intent to promote misuse of nicotine, smoking, or any other form of product abuse. Hello, my small fat adaptive family, and welcome back to the Keto Kitchen's Keto Guide. Today we're going to talk about whether or not vaping knocks you out of ketosis. I've got to confess something to you. I am an ex-smoker. I smoked for nearly 8 years and I stopped when I was 19. Just let that sink in of how young I was and how bad that is for me. I didn't actually stop smoking because I wanted to get healthier. You know, at this point I was already 2 years into keto. I actually stopped because I had to have a surgery and I wasn't allowed to smoke for 2 weeks before that surgery and 2 weeks after that surgery, and I had all intents to go back to smoking after my surgery, but I thought, hey, for the last nearly 8 years I've never gone this long without a cigarette. Let's just keep going. And now I'm 3 years smoke free, but I'm not nicotine free. I, Elliot of the Keto Kitchen, am a vapor. I'm just telling you all of this so that you get my background and understand that I'm very happy and very comfortable to talk about this, and I have a lot of experience in this specific subject, keto and vaping. As always, I've done a lot of research, I've spoken to people, the usual kind of things I say, and I'm not a registered practitioner, I'm not a nutritionist, I'm nothing professional. I'm just a young man with a love for science and keto. If that deters you, I'm more than happy to direct you to professionals that will tell you the same thing I do. So with that being said, let's look into the ingredients of a vape juice, an e-juice, whatever you like to call it. And then we'll sort of break them down and I'll talk about whether or not they've got the chance to knock you out of keto. So when it comes to a vape juice, the usual ingredients are propylene glycol, vegetable glycerine, flavouring, and in some cases, sweetener and or nicotine. So let's start with a propylene glycol and let's get sciencey. Propylene glycol, not to be confused with ethylene glycol, is an organic compound which has many uses in everything from food manufacturing all the way to lubrication for industrial machines. Oral toxicity for both short-term and long-term exposure is very low. In humans, propylene glycol is metabolized into lactic acids, pyruvic acids, which is a ketone that can be converted into glucose via gluconeogenesis, and acetic acid, which is vinegar. All three of those acids are found naturally in the body. In terms of gluconeogenesis, it's so unlikely to happen because gluconeogenesis is demand-driven, not supply-driven. And regardless, the average vape user would be inhaling about 0.5 gram of propylene glycol a day. Not all of which would even be digested, but for the sake of this argument, let's say that it's 50% that is metabolized. That equates to about 0.25 gram of carbs per day from propylene glycol. The only other likely complication of having propylene glycol is if you are on metformin, and even then it's rare, but metformin has been known to potentiate lactic acidosis, which is a potentially life-threatening condition caused by a buildup of lactic acid. However, it's just completely unlikely that the amount of lactic acid within the propylene glycol that's within your vape juice is enough to cause lactic acidosis. It's just something to be aware of. Now, the bottom line with propylene glycol is that it's generally recognised as safe and should have a neutral effect on your blood sugars, meaning it won't affect ketosis for you. Now, in terms of vegetable glycerine, which is more commonly known as glycerol, vegetable glycerine is a polyol, a sugar alcohol. Glycerol is a common food additive which works as a preservative, a sweetener, and a thickening agent. We metabolize glycerol or vegetable glycerine in the form of triglycerides, phospholipids, and possibly glucose. Now, if you're not up to date on what sugar alcohol, what polyol is, polyol sugar alcohols, they go by both names. They're neither a sugar nor an alcohol, but their structure sort of mimics both, and that's why they are called sugar alcohols commonly. And glycerol as a polyol is not metabolized the same way sugar is by your body. So as in some of it goes straight down into your intestines, and other bits will go through your full digestive system. Now, the bits that go through your digestive system have the potential to raise your insulin a little bit to help them move around, so making your blood sugars higher. From what I could find, vegetable glycerin has such a low glycemic index compared to something like table sugar and even some other polyols or sugar alcohols. It could cause a small increase in your blood sugars, though the amount contained within your vape that then goes into your system is just so unlikely to cause a noticeable blip at all. The bottom line for vegetable glycerin or glycerol is that it's generally recognised as safe and might produce the smallest temporary elevation in your blood sugars, which, unless you're vaping non-stop for hours on end, shouldn't have an effect on your keto journey at all. But if that does worry you, you can change your juice. So vape juice comes in many different percentages. I personally smoke 70-30, so 70 vegetable glycerin and 30 propylene glycol, but you can get 50-50 or 70-30 in favour of propylene glycol if you're worried. Now let's talk about the third biggest component when it comes to vape juice, and that is flavouring. In all honesty, there isn't much science to delve into here. Clearly it's not something that's needed to be researched, but what we do know is that there are two types of flavouring. There's natural and there's artificial. On a scientific scale, the only difference between natural and artificial flavouring is where they are sourced from. So one might be collected from inedible pulp, for example, but the same chemical could also be collected from like a pear fruit or something like that. At the end of the day, these chemicals are known, and you very likely had many of them in some sort of flavouring of your food or drinks. Providing you buy yourself vape juice from a verified seller, or if you're making it at home, you're getting your ingredients from a verified seller, you've got nothing to worry about in terms of flavouring. You know, there's no nasty unknown things in them, and you should have complete access to the nutrients, which 99.9% of the time has zero nutrients to it, therefore not having any effect on your blood sugars on your keto journey. The only thing I'd say is I'd go out of your way to avoid diacetyl, which is a butter flavouring, because it's one that's very well known with the whole butter industry and problems with your lungs, commonly popcorn lung. It usually comes from this chemical being inhaled lots and lots over time. But like I said, in terms of nutrition, flavouring is like alcohol, water, a chemical compound, and that's pretty much it. And when they do have calories, from what I've looked into across all different brands of vape juice, you're looking at about 5 calories for a 50ml bottle. For reference, that is a 50ml vape juice bottle, and that whole thing has 5 calories, and you know, it takes me like a month to get through that bottle, so it's absolutely nothing to worry about. Now, before we talk about the most important thing in terms of keto and vaping, let's talk about the potential of having a sweetener in your vape juice. Some companies make their vapes and add sweetener to them. Not all, but some do. If the company you're using does use sweetener, they're likely using sucralose, as it's the most common within the vaping market. Again, sucralose is a sweetener that doesn't have an exact glycemic index, and it really varies on the person and what they're going to do to their blood sugars. But 2 important things to remember in terms of having sweetener in your vape juice is, number 1, and I'll talk about this in a bit, is the difference between inhaling and metabolizing vape juice. And number 2 is, like I said, not all companies sweeten their vape juices. You can usually tell by, once you've had a vape, if you lick your lips, if it's sweet, it probably has sweetener in it. If you can't tell from that, it will burn through your coil really quickly. So the vape juices that burn through your coil quickly, they're the ones that are probably sweetened if you don't know. So if you're sensitive to blood spikes from sucralose, just be aware, and you might have to ask the company what sweeteners they use, because a lot of the time they don't actually tell you which sweetener it is. Some companies use erythritol, which is the best choice for us. And whilst it's unlikely, there are a few companies that use something called ethyl maltol. This is one that you should avoid as much as you can, because whilst it's technically under the same label as some great sugar alcohols we know, like erythritol, it has a much higher glycemic index than like many other sugar alcohols, which means you'll have a higher sugar spike when vaping something that's been sweetened with ethyl maltol. It's not likely, but again, it's worth being aware. And you don't need to worry about sugar. There will be absolutely no sugar in your vape juice. This is for one of two reasons. Number one is that sugar in a bottle of vape juice can mold quickly, or it can go moldy in your pen, which means the expiry date would come down significantly and the company would make much less money because of it. And number two is that sugar carbonizes really quickly in your vape pen. Sugar carbonizes as it turns into vapor, and it does this so rapidly that it would just be consistently destroying the coil in your pen, the bit that makes you able to vape. Again, companies wouldn't make very much money off of it if they did this. And lastly, in terms of vape juice, let's talk about the component that is most likely to knock you out of ketosis, and that is nicotine. If you're like me and you're using vaping to get you away from smoking, you may be using a vape juice with nicotine in it. You can absolutely get them without, but you can also get them with. Out of everything we've spoken about, nicotine is the most likely to cause a spike in your blood sugars that could potentially cause you to come out of ketosis. Quite simply, nicotine is shown again and again in research and in different studies to both raise and drop the blood sugar, depending on the person, and raise their chances of insulin resistance. So how much nicotine would knock you out of ketosis? E-cigarette juice will only go up to 36 milligrams per milliliter, and that is the equivalent of a chain smoker, somebody that has like 2 40-gram packs of cigarettes a day. The most popular is either 3 or 6 milligrams per milliliter, and this is sort of the equivalent to 1 to 10 cigarettes daily. I have just done a bit of fear mongering because I've said it really has the potential to knock you out of keto, but the likelihood of it is just so slim. You'd really have to be a chain vapor to get close to knocking yourself out of keto via nicotine in a vape pen. So let's delve a little bit more in and explain why it is that nicotine's unlikely to, even though research has shown that nicotine can drop and raise blood sugars and cause insulin resistance and horrible things that we're trying to avoid on keto. So if we look at what I vape 3 milligram juice, that's 3 milligrams of nicotine. What we do in this country, because it's illegal to do it any other way for big bottles of vape juice, is we buy these nicotine shots, and these basically are nicotine within a like vegetable glycerine or propylene glycol mix. And then we add that to a 40ml bottle, and that makes a 50ml bottle like this one that is got nicotine in it, right? Now that might seem like it's got a lot of nicotine if a fifth of it is nicotine. No, not necessarily. It might look like a lot, but it's not. So what this means is that per mil of juice in a 50ml bottle is 3 milligrams of nicotine. Now I get through about 10 to 15 mil a day, so that's about 5 cigarettes worth of nicotine, right? And again, that seems like a lot. 5 cigarettes of nicotine, you know, for somebody that doesn't smoke anymore, that is still quite a lot of nicotine. No, not necessarily. And the reason for that is because we're not taking into consideration how much of it is actually ingested by my body. So on average, 30% of the nicotine is ingested by my body, right? 30% of 5 is 1.5. That means I am inhaling the equivalent in nicotine of 1.5 cigarettes a day. So what effect is this having on my bloods? Is it raising them? And if so, by how much? Little to nothing. Now, I personally know many diabetics on forums that vape much more nicotine than me, and they haven't had any changes in their blood sugars. But rather than being anecdotal, let's look at this scientifically. Out of everything we've spoken about, nicotine is most likely to raise your blood sugars, right? We've got that. Now, the interesting thing is it can actually raise your HbA1c, and it can raise it from anywhere from 2% to 36%, right? Sounds like a lot. But again, these are stats we're getting from smokers. And we are not smoking, it's not the same system. A smoker is having on average 8 milligrams of nicotine per cigarette. Now, if I'm only getting about 30% of that nicotine, then I need to chop 70% off of an average vape smoker, right? A 3 milligram vape smoker. And that can be anywhere from 0.6 to 10.2. So even on the drastic scale, if we look at my bloods, and my bloods at the moment are about 4.1 millimoles per litre, if that had a 10.2% raise That's only 4.5 millimoles per litre. It's nothing to write home about. My bloods haven't drastically gone through the roof. So nicotine can affect your bloods, absolutely. And you should avoid nicotine where possible. It's a horrible addictive thing. But will it kick you out of keto? Probably not. Now, a few more points I'd like to talk about. I want to talk about how our body interprets vapor. Okay, so you come down for breakfast with your friend, and this is a hypothetical situation. You come down for breakfast with your friend, and there's 2 bowls of cornflakes ready for you. Your friend sits down, and he starts eating the cornflakes. And for some reason, on this strange day you're having, you decide that you're going to get your nutrients by setting the cornflakes on fire and inhaling the smoke, getting the energy that way, right? There is a huge difference here. The massive difference between your friend eating his cornflakes and you vaping your cornflakes is the difference between ingesting food via your stomach and what little your body will take in transmuscularly by vaping. Let me explain a vape pen really quickly here to just make it a little bit easier for anyone watching that doesn't understand these sort of vape pens. So in this little bit here, you can see I've got juice in there. Actually inside this sort of chamber is a coil. What that is it's like a metal coil, like a slinky, and then it's got cotton around it. So what happens when I press this button is that the coil heats up, right? And it gives me, as you can see, vapor. Now the majority of the juice being pulled into my coil for this process to happen ends up being used in the heating process. So you only ever actually inhale a small amount of these combined ingredients. And this is the first place you don't use all the juice that you load up into your pen, right? And this is where my weird cornflakes metaphor comes back, okay? When you vape, you're dealing with a gas exchange that occurs in the lungs, as well as muscusal absorption of material through the muscusal lining of the mouth, the nose, lungs, other places as well. If you look at the difference between you burning cornflakes and inhaling it versus your friend that is eating it, their body's dealing with everything. Everything that goes in has to be sorted through a system and come back out again, right? Stuff that isn't needed and absorbed. And you, by inhaling it, you're taking in about 80%, right? Because of the coiling process. Then on top of that, only about 30% of that is able to break through the muscle lining to get through to your muscles and your blood before you actually breathe it out again. What you put in your pen and what you inhale are not the exact same thing, because there are many different exchanges that go on that mean that you lose a lot of your vapor. It's like making Kool-Aid, or for my Brits, cordial, right? You don't just drink cordial straight out the bottle, and alternatively for, you know, the Americans with Kool-Aid, you don't put a whole sachet of Kool-Aid in 10 ml of water, do you? No, it would be way too strong. You need to dilute it, and that's kind of the same thing your body's doing, is it's diluting the vapor. So yes, vape juice itself is in a very high concentrate, but that is not what is going on in here and up here when you inhale it. So in the most simplest, least sciencey terms, vaping should absolutely not kick you out of keto, even if you're vaping with quite a high nicotine. And one final note that I've been asked about, really interesting, is people worry about the flavours they have. So I vape things like strawberry milk and cookies and all of these things I don't eat. That's what I tend to vape, and they worry that those sweet flavours are bad for them, right? No. Really interesting thing I want you to do if you're a vapor, hold your nose and vape. You won't be able to taste anything or barely anything, and that's because the flavour you're getting is 85% your scent, your nose. So you don't need to worry about that either. With that being said, that's all for this video. Leave a like if you found it interesting, insightful or helpful. Subscribe if you're inclined, and if you hit the bell, it will notify you as to when I upload. Any questions, any comments, any queries, anything down below. Keep calm, keep on. Thanks for watching.